This season, we've been exploring a question that sits beneath almost everything we believe. How much of what we call our life is actually ours? We've talked about attention, we've talked about conditioning, we've talked about the possibility that our minds are running programs we never consciously wrote. And today, I want to ask what may be one of the biggest questions of all. Did we choose marriage, or were we taught to want it long before we were old enough to question it? Because if we're being honest, most of us encountered marriage before we understood what it meant, before we knew what commitment was, before we understood sacrifice, before we knew anything about compatibility, finances, or what it actually feels like to share your entire life with another person. And yet somehow we already knew we were supposed to want it. Someone would ask us, what will your wedding look like? Not that, do you want to get married? The assumption was already built into the question. Fairy tales ended with marriage, movies ended with marriage, songs were written about it. Entire industries were built around it. And somewhere along the line, without anyone sitting us down and explaining it, many of us absorbed the same message. One day, someone will choose you, and then your life will begin. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode with me, Ani, where we never take the obvious answers seriously. But my question is, where did that idea come from? Because the version of marriage we inherited, romantic, eternal, based on love and mutual choosing, is remarkably new. For most of human history, marriage had almost nothing to do with love. It was a contract, a way of transferring property between families, a mechanism for securing alliances between tribes, kingdoms, bloodlines, a system for determining who owned what, who inherited what, and whose children belonged to whom. Women were not choosing husbands, women were being exchanged, not always cruelly, not always consciously, but systematically. Because in a world where women could not own property, they could not work, could not exist financially without a man, marriage wasn't a romantic choice. It was the only option available. And the men who entered it weren't necessarily choosing freely either. They were inheriting expectations just as heavy, being the provider, being the protector, head of the household, and roles passed down with the same unquestioned certainty as everything else. This is the foundation marriage was built on, not soulmates, not completion, not the person who makes your heart feel like home. It was about survival, economics, social order. Love came much later, and when it did arrive, when the romantic era began telling us that love was the only legitimate reason for marriage, it didn't replace the older structure. It was layered on top of it. So now we have an ancient institution built on property and survival, dressed in a language of romance and sold to us as the natural destination of every human heart. Now, let's talk about something we rarely say this directly. Patriarchy didn't just shape marriage as an institution, it shaped women's relationship to themselves. It created a specific story about what a woman is for. And that story was installed so early, so quietly, so completely that most women spent decades believing it was simply who they were. Think about what little girls are taught, not in classrooms, but in the air around them. Be agreeable, be pretty, be available, don't take up too much space, don't want too much, don't be too loud, too angry, too ambitious. And above everything else, be chosen. Because the underlying message of patriarchal programming isn't just get married, it's something far more insidious than that. It's you are not complete on your own. It tells you that your value is relational. Your worth is determined by who wants you. Your identity is confirmed by someone else's choice of you. And so women have spent centuries not building themselves, but making themselves buildable. shapeable, palatable, easy to love in a way men were taught to love. We learn to shrink our opinions in relationships to keep the peace. We learn to manage his emotions while quietly abandoning our own. We learned to call our own needs too much before anyone else had the chance to. We learned that a woman who is difficult to love must be the problem, never the definition of love itself. And here's the part that should make us stop completely. Most of us didn't learn this from villains. We learned it from our mothers, who learned it from theirs, who learned it from theirs. Women passing down their own limitation as survival wisdom. Don't be too independent or you will feel threatened. Learn to cook or no man will want you. A good woman knows when to be quiet. Not because these women didn't love us, but because they were also running the program and they wanted us to survive inside the same system that had shaped them. And for centuries, millennia, the message was never simpler than that. A woman without a husband was not just unmarried, she was suspicious, she was pitied, she was dangerous. For example, an unmarried woman past a certain age was considered a social problem to be solved. In many cultures throughout history, a woman who could not attract a husband was seen as defective. Not the system, not the expectations, her. And even now in 2026, in some of the most progressive societies on earth, a woman in her late 30s who is single, who is child-free, still has to navigate a specific kind of social discomfort. People don't always say it out loud anymore, but the question lives in the silence. Is she okay? What happened? Doesn't she want love? As if the absence of husband is a wound that needs explaining. And this is centuries of programming still running in upgraded language with better manners, but the same core instruction. A woman alone is woman incomplete. And then we wonder why so many women enter marriage not from fullness, but from fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of the clock, fear of being seen as someone nobody wanted, fear of ending up alone in the world that still treats solitude in women as failure. And we dress that fear in the language of love. We call it chemistry, we call it fate, we call it finding the one. Which brings me to something I think about very often. We've been sold ideas that sound romantic but are actually doing quite damage. For example, the better half, the idea that you are half and the person and love completes you. But here's what you actually means if you follow it to its conclusion. You arrive at the most important relationship of your life as a half, incomplete, looking for someone to fill what's missing. And then you're surprised when two halves don't make a whole. They make two people trying to extract completion from someone who is also incomplete. And that's not love. That is mutual dependence dressed in romantic language. Or something like twin flames, the idea that somewhere in the world there is one specific soul that is a mirror of you, and your entire spiritual purpose is to find that person and merge. Sounds profound. This belief makes love a destination rather than practice, a discovery rather than a choice made daily. And it lets people stay in painful, destructive, chaotic connections because the chaos feels like intensity. And intensity has been sold to us as a proof that something is real. Real love is not a chaos. Real love is not the feeling of finally being completed. Real love is two whole people choosing each other with clear eyes from a place of fullness and not desperation. And this is where children become part of the conversation, because we have inherited a story about children too, that they are the natural next step, the proof that love was real, the thing that makes a family legitimate. And for many people, children are a profound and chosen joy. But we rarely talk honestly about what happens when children arrive inside a marriage that was built on incomplete foundations, when two people who were running from loneliness or following a timeline or trying to save something already breaking bring a child into that space. Children do not fix marriages, they amplify everything already there. If there is love and security, they amplify it. If there is resentment, unresolved wounds, unspoken needs, they amplify that too. And the children who grew up inside those amplified dynamics become the adult who come to conversations like this one, trying to understand why their nervous system reach for certain things, why certain patterns feel like home, why love has always felt slightly dangerous or slightly out of reach. The cycle continues, not because people are bad parents, but because they were incomplete people who were never taught that completion was their own work to do before they tried to build something with someone else. So, what does it look like when a woman arrives at love differently? When she has done the work not to make herself more lovable, but to make herself more known to herself. She doesn't need to be chosen to feel real. She already knows who she is without a witness. She can be alone on a Saturday night and not feel like a failure. She can hear the question, when are you getting married, and feel curiosity instead of shame. She can look at a relationship and ask, does this add to my life rather than will this save me from myself? She knows the difference between choosing someone and needing someone. She understands that love is not the moment someone completes her. It's the moment someone sees her clearly and she sees them clearly, and they both decide that this is worth building, not because they have to, not because the timeline said so, not because the alternative felt unbearable, but because they genuinely, consciously, freely chose it. That is what a chosen relationship looks like, and it is available to every woman who is willing to first become someone who doesn't need to be chosen to know her own worth. So perhaps the most honest question we can ask ourselves is not, do I want to get married, but who taught me that I should? And if the answer isn't entirely you, that's not a reason for shame. It's a reason for curiosity, because awareness isn't about rejecting the things we've inherited. It's about finally seeing them clearly. Once you can see the program, you may still choose exactly what the program suggested. But for the first time in your life, the choice is truly yours. And a chosen life, even if it looks exactly like the life you were handed, feels completely different from the inside. So, my lovely friends, I want to thank you for being here. This conversation is one I think we all need to have more honestly with ourselves first. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might be ready to hear it. And I would like to know, was there a moment you first questioned whether you actually chose the life you were living, or whether the desire you thought was yours had been placed there long before you arrived? Tell me in the comments. I read everything. And until next time, stay bold, stay aware, and always go beyond the mind.